Merciless heat beat down on Jacob Hartwell's weathered face as he rode through the Sonora desert, his horse's hooves kicking up red dust that hung in the still air like a crimson ghost. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, dominated by towering saguaro cacti that stood like silent sentinels against the brutal blue sky. Sweat trickled down his temple, disappearing into his 3-day beard as he squinted at the horizon, tracking the outlaw he'd been chasing for 2 weeks. Jacob's blue-gray eyes, perpetually tired and haunted, scanned the rocky terrain ahead. His deerskin canteen was nearly empty, and the heat shimmered off the orange and red rock formations in waves that made everything seem unreal, dreamlike. He adjusted the faded red neckerchief at his throat, Elena's neckerchief, the only piece of her he still carried besides the crushing weight of guilt that never left him. 3 years. 3 years since he'd found her collapsed in their small ranch house. Her lips moving with words he couldn't understand, her dark eyes pleading with him to comprehend something vital. 3 years since those Apache words had escaped her dying breath, mysterious and urgent. Dude, it's a bit, Duna Adani Da. He'd held her hand as the life drained from her beautiful mestiza face, helpless and confused, watching the light fade from eyes that had once looked at him with such warmth. The whiskey bottle in his saddlebag called to him now as it did every day since her death. Just one drink to take the edge off the heat, off the memories, off the emptiness that had become his constant companion. A distant crack echoed across the desert, sharp and unmistakable. Gunfire. Jacob pulled his horse to a halt, listening intently. Another shot, then several more in rapid succession, followed by screams that were abruptly silenced. His jaw tightened. He knew that sound too well, the sound of a massacre. Against his better judgment, Jacob spurred his horse toward the disturbance, cresting a rocky ridge to find a scene of horror below. An Apache camp, small and temporary, lay in ruins. Wickiups smoldered, their smoke rising in thin columns toward the cloudless sky. Bodies lay scattered across the red earth like broken dolls, and the metallic smell of blood mixed with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Soldiers. Jacob could see their blue uniforms retreating in the distance, riding hard back toward Fort Dalton. His stomach turned. This wasn't combat. This was slaughter. He dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt revolver at his hip, scanning for any remaining threats. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the weak cry of someone still clinging to life. Jacob found her behind an overturned wagon. A young Apache woman, no more than 22 years old, her traditional leather dress decorated with intricate beadwork now soaked in blood. A silver medallion hung from her neck, catching the harsh sunlight. She clutched at the wound in her side, her dark eyes wide with pain and fading awareness. "Hold on," Jacob said, dropping to his knees beside her. His hands moved automatically, pressing against the wound to stanch the bleeding, but he could feel the warmth of her life pouring out between his fingers. "I've got you. Just hold on." The young woman's eyes focused on his face, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Her lips moved, forming words with tremendous effort. Blood bubbled at the corner of her mouth. "What happened here?" Jacob asked, though he already knew the answer. Who did this? But she wasn't listening to his questions. Her trembling hand reached up, grasping the medallion at her neck, and then her fingers found his shirt, pulling him closer with surprising strength. Her eyes locked onto his with desperate intensity. "Listen," she gasped in heavily accented English. "You ... no." Then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Words in Apache that cut through Jacob like a knife made of ice and memory. "Shadidi, it's a beat, Duna Adanida. Don't drink the whiskey of the long shot." The exact words, the identical phrase. The same warning Elena had given him with her dying breath 3 years ago. Jacob's world tilted. His hands trembled as the young woman's grip loosened, her eyes becoming glassy and fixed. "Wait," he said urgently, his voice cracking. "What does it mean? Tell me what it means." "My wife Lanesha said the same words." "Please." But Mary Wolfenshadowed he would later learn her name from papers found in the camp was already gone. Her final message delivered to a stranger who carried the same burden of incomprehension she'd known he would. Jacob sat back on his heels, his hands covered in her blood, staring at the silver medallion that still hung around her neck. With shaking fingers, he lifted it, studying the intricate Apache symbols etched into the metal. His breath caught in his throat. It was identical. Identical to the medallion Elena had worn every single day of their marriage. The one he'd buried with her because he couldn't bear to look at it anymore. Couldn't face the reminder of all he'd failed to understand, all he'd failed to protect. The sun continued its merciless descent toward the horizon as Jacob buried Mary and the others. his back aching, his heart heavy with questions that multiplied like desert thorns. Why would two women dying years apart speak the same cryptic warning to him? What connection did they share beyond these matching medallions? And what did it have to do with whiskey and shadows? As darkness fell and the desert temperature plummeted from scorching to frigid, Jacob made camp near the site, unable to bring himself to leave just yet. He built a small fire and sat staring into the flames, the bottle of whiskey from his saddlebag resting beside him unopened for the first time in months. The warning echoed in his mind, spoken in two voices now, layered and insistent. He thought about Redemption Creek, the dusty frontier town where he'd been headed to collect his bounty money. The town had a saloon, the Desert Rose, where he'd spent too many nights drowning his memories in cheap liquor. The town also had Fort Dalton nearby, where Colonel Thaddeus Crane commanded with an iron fist and a reputation for pacifying the Apache territories through any means necessary. Elena had warned him about something involving whiskey 3 years ago. Now this young Apache woman had delivered the same warning moments before her death at the hands of soldiers likely under Crane's command. The pieces didn't connect yet, but Jacob could feel the shape of something larger, something deliberate and dark, lurking just beyond his understanding. He picked up the whiskey bottle, feeling its weight, remembering the countless times he'd sought oblivion in its amber depths. The firelight danced across the glass, creating shadows that seemed to reach toward him with long, dark fingers. Long shadow. Jacob's eyes widened. He unstoppered the bottle and sniffed carefully. It smelled like whiskey, harsh, sharp, familiar. But something nagged at him, some instinct honed by years of tracking and survival. He poured a small amount onto the ground and watched it soak into the red earth. In the firelight, he thought he saw something odd in the liquid's consistency, something that didn't quite match the whiskey he knew. "What are you hiding?" he muttered to the bottle, his voice rough with disuse and emotion. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of Elena's face, her lips moving with words he still couldn't comprehend, and the young Apache woman's desperate eyes, both of them reaching toward him across an impossible divide of death and mystery. When dawn broke, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Jacob made a decision. He wouldn't go straight to Redemption Creek to collect his bounty. First, he would make a detour to a place he'd avoided for 3 years, a place that held nothing but pain and ghosts. The abandoned Hartwell Ranch, where Elena had died in his arms, where she was buried beneath a simple wooden cross, where perhaps some clue remained that he'd been too broken to see before. He mounted his horse and turned away from the destroyed Apache camp, carrying with him the weight of 2 deaths, 2 identical warnings, and 2 medallions that suggested a connection he was only beginning to unravel. The bottle of whiskey remained in his saddlebag, but for the first time since Elena's death, he viewed it not as salvation, but as a potential weapon, a piece of evidence in a puzzle that had claimed too many lives already. The ride to his old ranch took most of the day, following trails he'd once known by heart, but that now felt foreign and overgrown with grief. As he approached the property line, marked by broken fences and dried-up irrigation ditches, memories assaulted him with visceral force. Elena laughing as she hung laundry in the desert wind, her long black hair whipping around her face. Elena singing softly in Spanish and Apache as she cooked, filling their small home with warmth and the aroma of tortillas and stewed rabbit. Elena lying in their bed at night, tracing the scar on his chin with gentle fingers, telling him stories about her Apache mother and Mexican father, about growing up between 2 worlds, never fully belonging to either. The ranch house stood exactly as he'd left it, weathered and decaying, its windows dark like dead eyes. Jacob's chest tightened as he dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. The well was still dry, its wooden cover warped by 3 years of neglect. The small barn leaned precariously to one side, its door hanging from a single hinge. And there, beyond the house, stood the simple wooden cross that marked Elena's resting place. Jacob approached slowly, removing his worn black hat and holding it against his chest. 3 years of desert wind had weathered the cross, but the name he'd carved there remained visible: Elena Maria Hartwell, beloved wife, 1850 to 1875. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "I'm so sorry I didn't understand. I'm going to now. I promise you, Elena, I'm going to figure out what you were trying to tell me." He knelt beside her grave, his fingers tracing the letters of her name. And for the first time since her death, he allowed himself to truly remember her final moments. She'd been sick for days, fevered and delirious, but he'd thought it was just a bad bout of influenza. He'd ridden to Redemption Creek for medicine, leaving her alone, and when he returned, she was dying. The doctor in town, old Doc Winters, had said it looked like poisoning, but from what? He couldn't say. Jacob had dismissed it as speculation, too consumed by grief to pursue it further. But now, with Mary's dying words echoing Elena's, with the matching medallions and the cryptic warning about whiskey, he began to see his wife's death in a different, more sinister light. Had Elena been poisoned deliberately? Had she discovered something dangerous, something that got her killed? And if so, why had it taken 3 years for another woman to deliver the same warning? Jacob stood and turned toward the house, steeling himself. He hadn't been inside since the day after Elena's funeral, when he'd locked the door and walked away, unable to face the life they'd built together, now empty and meaningless without her. The door creaked open on rusty hinges, revealing the dusty interior frozen in time like a tomb. Everything remained exactly as he'd left it, their table with 2 chairs, Elena's cooking pots hanging on the wall, their bed in the corner with its colorful blanket that she'd woven herself, her clothes still hanging on pegs. Jacob's throat constricted, but he forced himself forward, moving methodically through the small space, searching for anything he might have missed in his grief-stricken state 3 years ago. He went through Elena's belongings, her few dresses, her collection of herbs and medicinal plants that she'd used for healing, her books, one in Spanish, one in English, both well-worn from her efforts to improve her reading. In a small wooden box beneath their bed, he found her personal treasures, a tin-type photograph of her parents, both long dead, a beaded bracelet her mother had made, letters from her younger brother who lived with distant relatives in New Mexico, and a small leather journal he'd never seen before. Jacob's hands trembled as he opened the journal, finding Elena's careful handwriting filling the pages in a mixture of English and Spanish, with occasional words in Apache. Many entries were mundane, notes about the ranch, recipes, observations about the weather, but as he flipped toward the end, the tone changed, becoming worried, almost fearful. One entry, dated 2 weeks before her death, made his blood run cold. Jacob doesn't believe me when I tell him about the whiskey from Fort Dalton. He thinks I'm being superstitious, seeing threats that aren't there. But I know what I saw in town. Maria Gonzalez, sick and dying the same way my Uncle Santiago died last year. And both of them received gifts of whiskey from Colonel Crane's men, presented as gestures of goodwill to the Mestizo and Apache families in the area. My mother's people have a saying about the long shadow: it falls before something dark arrives. I must find proof before I can make Jacob understand. I must protect him, protect us. Tomorrow I will speak with Samuel at the stable. He knows things, sees things the Colonel doesn't realize. He can help me understand what's in that whiskey. Jacob read the passage 3 times, his mind reeling. Elena had been investigating something involving Colonel Crane and poisoned whiskey. She'd tried to warn him, tried to tell him, but he'd been too dismissive, too focused on his own work, too blind to see the danger she was in. And Sam Prescott, the stable master in Redemption Creek, an ex-Buffalo soldier who'd always been kind to Elena, who'd attended her funeral and offered Jacob his condolences with genuine sorrow in his weathered face. Samuel knew something. Samuel might have the answers Jacob desperately needed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the abandoned ranch, Jacob carefully packed Elena's journal into his saddlebag alongside the unopened whiskey bottle. He took one last look around their home, memorizing the details he'd tried so hard to forget, letting the pain of loss wash over him without trying to drown it in alcohol for the first time in 3 years. I'll make this right, he promised the empty room, the ghost of his wife, the memory of her love. I'll expose whoever did this to you. To all of you. The ride to Redemption Creek took him through the night, guided by a half-moon that cast silver light across the desert landscape. Jacob pushed his horse harder than he should have, driven by an urgency that had been absent from his life since Elena's death. For 3 years he'd been drifting, taking bounty jobs mechanically, drinking away his pain, existing but not truly living. Now finally he had a purpose beyond mere survival. Redemption Creek appeared on the horizon as dawn broke, its wooden buildings looking shabby and impermanent against the eternal desert. The main street was still quiet, with only a few early risers moving about their business. Jacob could see Fort Dalton in the distance, its American flag already raised, its walls imposing and threatening. He rode directly to the stable, finding Samuel already at work, mucking out stalls with the steady rhythm of long practice. The older black man looked up as Jacob dismounted, his dark eyes showing surprise and then concern. "Jacob Hartwell," Samuel said, leaning on his pitchfork. "Haven't seen you around these parts in months. I heard you were chasing bounties up north." "I was," Jacob replied, his voice hoarse from disuse. "Until yesterday." He told Samuel everything, finding the massacred Apache camp, the dying woman and her warning, the medallion, Elena's journal. As he spoke, he watched Samuel's expression shift from surprise to recognition to something that looked like relief mixed with fear. When Jacob finished, Samuel looked around carefully, ensuring they were alone, then gestured for Jacob to follow him into the back room of the stable, where they kept the tack and supplies. In the dimly lit space, Samuel closed the door and turned to face Jacob with the gravity of a man unburdening a terrible secret. "I was wondering if this day would ever come," Samuel said quietly. "I've been carrying what I know for 3 years, ever since Elena came to me asking questions. I wanted to tell you then, but she made me promise to wait to gather more proof first. And then she died, and I thought maybe it was better to let it be, to not risk more lives. But I was wrong. People keep dying, and I've been a coward." "Tell me," Jacob said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside him. "Tell me everything." Samuel took a deep breath. "Colonel Crane's been poisoning people for at least 4 years, maybe longer, targeting Apache, mestizos, anyone with Indian blood or ties to the tribes. He gives them whiskey as gifts, as peace offerings to celebrate treaties or smooth over tensions. But the whiskey's poised, laced with something that makes people sick slow-like, so it doesn't seem connected to the drink. By the time symptoms show up, the whiskey's long gone, and it looks like natural illness." Jacob's fists clenched. "Why? Why would he do this?" "Land," Samuel said simply. "Every time one of these leaders or prominent community members dies, it destabilizes their families, their communities. Makes it easier for the government to claim the land, to push people onto reservations or force them out entirely. Crane gets promoted for his successful pacification efforts. And he gets paid under the table by the land speculators who snap up the territory cheap. I've seen the pattern, Jacob. Elena saw it too. She was smart, your wife. Too smart for her own good, maybe." "You think Crane killed Elena?" The words came out like broken glass. Samuel nodded grimly. "I think she got too close to the truth. She'd been asking questions, talking to other families who'd received these gifts. She was documenting everything, trying to build a case to bring to the territorial governor. And then she got sick, same as all the others. But she didn't receive any whiskey from Crane," Jacob protested. "I would have known." "You sure about that?" Samuel asked gently. "You were away a lot chasing bounties, and Crane's men are subtle. Could have been a bottle left on your porch, a gift at the general store that she picked up thinking it was from a friend. Elena wouldn't have told you about it if she thought it was harmless. She was trying to protect you, Jacob, by keeping you out of it until she had proof." Jacob's mind raced back, trying to remember. Had there been whiskey in the house when he returned from that last bounty run? He'd been so focused on getting medicine for Elena, on trying to save her, that he hadn't paid attention to such details. "Mary Wolf in shadow," Jacob said suddenly. "The Apache woman I found yesterday. She had the same medallion as Elena. What's the connection?" Samuel's expression became even more troubled. "The medallions are part of an old Apache tradition. They're given to women who serve as messengers, as carriers of important information between tribes and families. Elena's mother was one such messenger, and she passed the medallion to Elena. If this Mary had one too, she was likely continuing that work, carrying warnings to other Apache families about Crane's poisoned whiskey. And Crane found out," Jacob concluded darkly. "So he had her camp attacked, silenced her before she could warn more people." "That'd be my guess," Samuel agreed. "The man's gotten bold, Jacob. Used to be more careful, more subtle. But lately, especially in the last few months, he's been escalating. More attacks on Apache camps, more gifts of whiskey distributed. I think he's trying to wrap up his operation before someone higher up starts asking questions." Jacob's jaw tightened. "We need to stop him. We need proof evidence that will hold up, that can't be ignored or dismissed." "That's easier said than done," Samuel warned. "Crane's careful. He uses intermediaries, never handles the poisoned whiskey himself. And he's got powerful friends, investors, politicians, even some higher-ranking army officers who are in on the scheme. It's not just him, Jacob, it's a whole network. Then we'll take down the whole network," Jacob said with deadly calm. "Starting with Crane. Where does he keep the poisoned whiskey? How does he distribute it?" Samuel hesitated, then made his decision. "There's a warehouse near the fort. Officially, it's listed as surplus supplies, but I've seen Crane's men loading and unloading crates there at odd hours. And I know someone who works at Fort Dalton, a private named Tom Begay. He's Navajo. Been keeping his head down, but hates what Crane's doing. He might be willing to help us, might be able to get us inside." "Can you arrange a meeting?" Jacob asked. "I can try. But Jacob, you need to understand, if we do this, if we go after Crane, we're putting targets on our backs. He's already killed Elena. He won't hesitate to kill us too." Jacob met Samuel's eyes with an unwavering gaze. "He killed my wife. He killed Mary and her people. He's killing innocent families with poison while hiding behind his uniform and his position. I should have protected Elena 3 years ago, but I was blind. I won't be blind anymore." Whatever it takes, whatever the cost, I'm going to bring him down." Samuel studied Jacob's face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll get word to Tom, but in the meantime, you need to be careful. Don't let anyone know what you're planning. Crane has eyes and ears all over this town. The wrong word to the wrong person, and you'll end up like Elena dead before you can expose him." They agreed to meet again that evening after dark, giving Samuel time to contact Tom Begay and arrange a meeting. Jacob left the stable feeling more focused than he had in years, but also more vulnerable. Every person he passed on the street could be one of Crane's informants. Every window could hide watching eyes. He checked into the small boarding house on the edge of town, paying for a room under a false name, then spent the afternoon going through Elena's journal more carefully, making notes, trying to piece together exactly what she'd discovered before her death. The more he read, the clearer the picture became, and the more his guilt and rage grew. Elena had documented at least 15 deaths that she suspected were linked to Crane's poisoned whiskey. She'd noted patterns, gifts of alcohol given after disputes or tensions with the army, illnesses that followed weeks later, deaths that were attributed to natural causes, but that all shared similar symptoms. She'd even obtained a sample of the whiskey from one family, though she'd had no way to test it for poison. That sample. Jacob flipped through the journal looking for any mention of where Elena might have hidden it. Near the end, he found a cryptic note. "Sample secured in the place where we first kissed. Wrapped in my mother's scarf. Jay will know where to look if something happens to me. The place where they first kissed." Jacob closed his eyes, remembering. It had been by the old well on their ranch, on a cool evening when the stars had seemed close enough to touch. Elena had been drawing water, and he'd helped her carry the bucket. And their hands had touched, and he'd leaned in without thinking, and she'd smiled against his lips. The well. She'd hidden the sample in the old well. Jacob wanted to ride out to the ranch immediately, but dusk was already falling, and he had to meet Samuel and Tom Begay. The sample would have to wait until tomorrow. For now, he needed to focus on getting inside that warehouse, on finding proof that was fresher, more substantial, more likely to stand up in a court of law. He met Samuel behind the stable after dark, and they walked together through the shadows to a small abandoned shack on the outskirts of town. Inside, a young man waited, his Navajo features tense with fear and determination. Tom Begay couldn't have been more than 25 years old, but his eyes held the weariness of someone who'd seen too much ugliness. "You're the one asking about Crane's operation?" Tom asked without preamble. "I am," Jacob confirmed. "Samuel says you work at the fort." "I do. I'm a private assigned to supply management, which means I see things that don't add up, things that make me sick." Tom's voice was bitter. "I joined the army thinking I'd serve my country, maybe earn some respect. Instead, I'm watching officers murder my people slowly, methodically, while hiding behind patriotism and progress." "Can you get us into the warehouse?" Jacob asked. Tom nodded slowly. "I can. I have keys to most of the supply buildings. But it's risky. Crane has guards, and if we're caught, we won't make it to trial. He'll have us shot for trespassing on military property and claim we were thieves or spies." "I understand the risk," Jacob said, "but I need to see what's in there. I need proof that will hold up. That can't be dismissed. My wife died trying to expose this. I won't let her death be for nothing." Tom and Samuel exchanged glances. Then Tom spoke again. "There's a shipment coming in tomorrow night. Crane always inspects new arrivals personally, which means the warehouse will be locked down tight. But the night after tomorrow, he'll be at a dinner at the commanding officer's house, a social event he can't skip without raising suspicion. That's our window. I can get you in around midnight." "What are we looking for specifically?" Samuel asked. "Documentation," Tom said. "Crane keeps records. He has to, for his own protection, in case his partners try to cheat him. Ledgers showing purchases of the arsenic and other poisons, lists of targets, payment records from the land speculators. He thinks he's safe because the warehouse is on military property protected by his position. But those same records will damn him if we can get them out. Can you help us photograph them?" Jacob asked. "Or do we need to steal the originals?" Tom frowned. "Stealing them would alert Crane immediately. Better if we can photograph the key pages. I have access to a camera from the fort's documentation office. If we're quick and careful, we might be able to document enough evidence without Crane knowing we were there." They spent the next hour planning the operation in detail, entry and exit routes, what to do if guards showed up, how to communicate silently, where to hide the photographs once taken. Jacob felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the false, temporary hope that came from a bottle, but real, solid hope built on action and purpose. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Jacob couldn't return to his ranch to retrieve Elena's sample without drawing attention, so he forced himself to stay in town, keeping a low profile. He watched the fort from a distance, observing the patterns of guard changes, the comings and goings of soldiers and supply wagons. He also watched Colonel Thaddeus Crane ride through town in the afternoon, tall and imposing in his pristine blue uniform. His graying hair slicked back with pomade, his cold blue eyes surveying Redemption Creek like a king surveying his domain. The man radiated authority and entitlement, and Jacob felt his hatred crystallize into something sharp and focused. That man had killed Elena, had ordered her death either directly or through his poisoned whiskey, had taken the woman Jacob loved and turned her into just another casualty in his campaign of greed and genocide. Jacob's hand moved instinctively to his Colt, but Samuel, who'd been walking nearby, caught his eye and shook his head almost imperceptibly. Not yet. Not here. Not without proof. The following night finally arrived. Jacob met Tom and Samuel at the agreed location, all three men dressed in dark clothes, their faces grim with determination. Tom had brought the camera, a bulky but portable model, along with flash powder and plates. The warehouse sat about 300 yards from the main fort buildings, connected by a well-worn path but relatively isolated. Tom led them around the back, using his key to unlock a side door that groaned softly as it opened. Inside, the warehouse smelled of dust, wood, and something chemical that made Jacob's nose wrinkle. Moonlight filtered through high windows, providing just enough illumination to see rows of crates and barrels, stacked shelves, and a small office area in the back corner. "The records are in Crane's office," Tom whispered. "He keeps it locked, but I have a key to that too. Perks of being in supply management, we need access to everything." They moved carefully through the warehouse, their footsteps muffled by the dirt floor. Jacob's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and he noticed that many of the crates bore markings that didn't match standard military supplies. Some had symbols he recognized as pharmaceutical or chemical company logos. Tom unlocked the office door, and they slipped inside. The space was Spartan but functional, with a desk, filing cabinet, and safe. Tom went straight to the filing cabinet, using yet another key from his ring. "He's arrogant," Tom muttered as he pulled open drawers. "Thinks nobody would dare look, so he doesn't even try to hide things well." He pulled out several ledgers and spread them on the desk. Samuel lit a small, shielded lantern, keeping the light low and directed at the documents. Jacob leaned in, his heart pounding as he saw the evidence laid out before him. The ledgers were damning. Page after page detailed purchases of arsenic, strychnine, and other poisons from a supply company in San Francisco. Another ledger listed names of Apache leaders, mestizo families, influential community members, with dates beside each name and notes, like gift delivered or distribution complete. A third ledger showed payments received from a company called Southwestern Land Development Corporation, with amounts that made Jacob's eyes widen. "This is it," Samuel breathed. "This is everything we need." "Start photographing," Jacob said to Tom. "Every page that shows the poison purchases and the target lists. We need proof that can't be questioned." Tom worked quickly and efficiently, setting up the camera, positioning the documents, using the flash powder sparingly to capture clear images. Each flash seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night, and Jacob kept glancing toward the door, expecting guards to burst in at any moment. They were on the 5th ledger page when they heard voices outside. "Someone's coming," Samuel hissed. "Tom, how many more do you need?" "At least 3 more pages to make a complete case," Tom whispered back, his hands working frantically to position the next document. The voices grew closer. Jacob recognized one of them, Colonel Crane's distinctive commanding tone, edged with irritation. "I don't care what time it is, Lieutenant. I want those shipments inventoried tonight. We have buyers coming in 2 days, and I need exact counts." Jacob's mind raced. They couldn't leave yet, not without the rest of the photographs, but they also couldn't be caught here. "Keep working," he whispered to Tom. "Samuel, help me move these crates to block the office door. We'll buy Tom time." They quickly but quietly stacked crates against the office door, creating a barrier that would slow anyone trying to enter. Tom continued photographing, his movements becoming even more rushed as the sound of the warehouse's main door opening echoed through the building. "Faster," Jacob urged. Tom took the last photograph, the flash powder igniting with a small pop that seemed deafening. Outside the office, they heard someone shout, "What was that light? Is someone in here? Go," Jacob commanded, and Tom quickly packed up the camera and plates while Samuel extinguished the lantern. They had seconds before Crane and his men reached the office. Jacob looked around desperately for another exit and spotted a high window on the back wall of the office. "There," he said, pointing. "Samuel, give Tom a boost. Get him and that camera out. We'll follow." Samuel interlaced his fingers, and Tom stepped into the improvised step, pushing up and through the window with the camera bag slung over his shoulder. The crates blocking the office door began to shift as Crane's men pushed against them, Open this door immediately. Crane's voice boomed. That's an order. Samuel went through the window next, with Jacob boosting him from below. As Jacob prepared to follow, the door burst open, crates toppling, and Colonel Thaddeus Crane stood in the doorway, his cold eyes locking onto Jacob with instant recognition. You, Crane said, his voice deadly calm. Jacob Hartwell. I should have guessed. You're just like your meddling wife. Jacob's hand went to his gun, but Crane already had his pistol drawn, aimed steadily at Jacob's chest. You killed her, Jacob said, his voice shaking with rage. You poisoned Elena. Your wife was a problem, Crane replied coldly. She wouldn't stop asking questions, wouldn't accept the natural order of things. This land belongs to civilization, to progress. The Indians and their mixed-blood sympathizers need to understand their place or step aside. Your wife chose not to step aside, and the others? Jacob demanded. Marry Wolfin's shadow? All the families you've poisoned? They were just obstacles too? Crane smiled, a thin, cruel expression. Obstacles, exactly. And you're about to become another one. Trespassing on military property. Attempting to steal government records. That's grounds for summary execution. Behind Jacob, he heard Samuel and Tom calling his name in urgent whispers from the window. Crane's finger tightened on the trigger. Jacob didn't think. He grabbed the ledger nearest him and hurled it at Crane's face, then dove toward the window as Crane's gun fired, the bullet wheezing past Jacob's head and splintering the window frame. Samuel and Tom grabbed his arms, hauling him through the window as more shots rang out. They ran through the darkness, Crane's shouts of alarm raising the entire fort behind them. Jacob's heart hammered in his chest as they sprinted toward town, toward the horses they'd hidden near the edge of the settlement. They made it to the horses and rode hard into the desert night, not stopping until they were miles from Redemption Creek, the fort's lights distant pinpricks in the darkness behind them. Did you get the photographs? Jacob gasped, his hands shaking from adrenaline. Tom patted the camera bag. Every single one we needed. We have enough to hang Crane and his entire operation. Then we need to get to Santa Fe, Samuel said. To the territorial governor. We'll bypass the local military authorities, they're probably in on it anyway, and go straight to the top. Jacob nodded, but his mind was already moving beyond the immediate escape. First, we stop at my ranch. There's one more piece of evidence we need, a sample of the poisoned whiskey Elena obtained. With that, and these photographs, Crane won't be able to deny anything. They changed direction, heading toward the abandoned Hartwell ranch. As they rode, Jacob felt a weight beginning to lift from his shoulders. For 3 years, he'd carried the crushing guilt of Elena's death. The pain of not understanding her final words. The shame of numbing himself with whiskey rather than seeking justice. Now, finally, he understood. Now, finally, he could make things right. The ranch appeared in the pre-dawn light, looking even more ghostly and desolate than before. Jacob dismounted and went straight to the old well, kneeling beside it and reaching down into the darkness. His fingers found a cloth bundle wedged into a crevice about 6 feet down, exactly where Elena would have placed it knowing he could reach it. He pulled up the bundle, unwrapping his mother-in-law's scarf to reveal a small glass bottle filled with amber liquid. The poisoned whiskey. Elena's final gift to him, evidence she'd hidden knowing he might someday need it to understand, to fight back, to bring her killers to justice. I'm sorry I took so long, Jacob whispered, pressing the bottle against his chest. But I'm here now. I understand now, and I'm going to finish what you started. Samuel and Tom joined him at the well, their faces solemn in the growing light. What do we do now? Tom asked. Jacob looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to paint the sky in shades of gold and red. Somewhere out there, beyond the desert, beyond the mountains, was Santa Fe, was justice, was the possibility of finally making things right. Now, Jacob said. Standing and tucking the bottle carefully into his saddlebag alongside the camera with its precious photographs, we ride to Santa Fe. We tell the governor everything. We show him the proof, the ledgers, the poisoned whiskey, the pattern of deaths. And we make sure that Colonel Thaddeus Crane and everyone involved in his operation faces justice for what they've done. He'll fight back, Samuel warned. He has powerful friends, deep pockets. This won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever, as Jacob replied. He turned to look at Elena's grave one last time, placing his hand on the weathered wooden cross. But I made her a promise. I'm going to keep it. The 3 men mounted their horses and rode east toward Santa Fe, toward justice, toward redemption. Behind them, the abandoned ranch slowly faded into the distance, but Elena's spirit rode with them. Her warning finally understood, her death finally about to be avenged. The sun climbed higher into the endless Arizona sky, casting long shadows across the desert shadows that no longer seemed threatening but rather clarifying, illuminating the path forward. Jacob Hartwell, who had spent 3 years drowning in whiskey and guilt, finally had a purpose, finally understood what his wife had been trying to tell him, finally could see a way to honor her memory. Don't drink the whiskey of the long shadow. Now he understood. The long shadow wasn't just about the poison itself, it was about the darkness that Colonel Crane and men like him cast over everything they touched. The corruption and greed that stretched across the territory like a malevolent presence. Elena had been trying to warn him not just about literal poisoned whiskey, but about the poisonous nature of the entire system that allowed such atrocities to occur. And Mary Wolfenshadowed in her final moments had recognized him as someone who needed to hear that warning again, someone who could carry it forward, someone who could finally bring the truth to light. The ride to Santa Fe would take days, and Jacob knew that Crane would send men after them, would try to silence them before they could reach the territorial governor. But for the first time in 3 years, Jacob wasn't running from something. He was running toward something, toward justice, toward peace, toward redemption. As the desert miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, Jacob found himself thinking not about the whiskey in his saddlebag, neither the poison sample nor the bottle he'd been carrying for months, but about Elena, her smile, her strength and wisdom, her dedication to protecting people, even when it cost her everything. He would tell her story. He would make sure the territorial governor and the newspapers and everyone who needed to know understood exactly what she'd died trying to expose. Her death would not be in vain. None of their deaths would be in vain. The desert stretched endlessly before them, beautiful and brutal, ancient and indifferent. But Jacob Hartwell rode through it with purpose, carrying evidence of murder and conspiracy, carrying memories of his beloved wife, carrying the hopes of everyone who'd been victimized by Colonel Crane's poisoned whiskey and poisonous ambition. Behind him lay 3 years of grief and drunken numbness. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the possibility of justice. For the first time since Elena's death, Jacob chose to ride toward the uncertain future rather than away from the painful past. And as the sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the night's shadows, Jacob allowed himself something he hadn't permitted in 3 years: hope.